then our YouTube video would be taken down for inappropriate.
If you're happy and clap your hands.
Let's sing a Hamilton parody.
Oh,
Go ahead, Rod.
go ahead.
Yeah, I got some, believe me.
Come on now. Do it. Lord.
Okay, we're
The one in the room.
I'm turning my video on to see and hear this.
Yeah, what's happening in the room?
Okay, we
We're in
got
the room where it happens.
Right. Okay.
okay. We're ready.
Everything's ready?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll call to order the Board of Directors meeting for the Cities Association of Santa Clara County.
I'll be right back. Hold on.
Wait. Oh, well. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight on Thursday.
Sorry, I had to grab
August
something off the printer.
13th. Andy, may we have the roll call vote?
Yes. Campbell. Do we lose Campbell?
Just dropped out for a minute.
Just come back with two.
Continue. Oh, there she is.
I'm not the rep. I can't.
Okay. Coop. Oh, there he is. Hold on. Hey, Paul. You're just in time for roll call.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. Campbell.
Here.
Cupertino.
Here.
Gilroy. Los Altos. Did we lose Jan?
Here, no, I'm here.
Okay, great. Los Altos Hills. Los Gatos.
Here.
Milpitas.
Here.
Montessorino. Morgan Hill.
Present.
Mountain View.
Here.
Palo Alto.
Yes.
San Jose. Okay. Gilroy.
Here.
Santa Clara.
Here.
Saratoga.
Present.
And Sunnyvale.
Here.
Right. Is Steve Preminger here? No. Okay.
Okay, so we have a quorum. Next up is our consent agenda. Were there any comments or questions about the board meeting minutes, the financial reports, or the SCSC roundtable invoices? Is there a motion?
I move to approve what's on consent.
I'll
Mariko?
second. I'll second. Margaret.
Thank you. Campbell.
Aye.
Cupertino.
Aye.
Gilroy.
Yes.
Los Altos.
Yes.
Los Altos Hills. Los Gatos.
Yes.
Milpitas.
Yes.
Montessorino. Morgan Hill.
Present. Aye.
Mountain View.
Aye.
Palo Alto.
Aye.
San Jose. Not absent. Santa Clara.
Yes.
Saratoga.
Aye.
And Sunnyvale.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes.
Okay,
12 present, 3 absent.
thank you. Next up is committee and standing reports. First up is Legislation Action Committee. Lisa?
Thanks, Larry. So the committee had a very quick but productive discussion. We started out discussing the different housing related bills. And instead of discussing each bill, which normally takes 10 to 15 minutes, we actually took a different approach based on a recommendation from Senator Hill, where we discussed at a high level the different concerns we have regarding the housing related bills that are making their way through Sacramento. And so the proposal is to send a letter that lists these different concerns. We can take the approach of listing all the housing related bills and then listing our concerns. And these concerns include ensuring that we preserve our park and open space, recognizing that, we don't have agreement on our different councils. There's not enough land in a lot of our cities. It removes local control from cities. A lot of these housing bills do not factor in the COVID impact. It allows cities to override voter initiatives. It's actually not cost effective when you increase density in some of these residential zoned areas. We need to focus more on preserving our commercial, light industrial, retail, and professional services in our communities, because this could also go against our climate action plans. A lot of the bills also could negatively impact or revenue generated from taxes. For example, the TOT, if our hotels and motels are converted to residential units, there's a concern expressed about we're in a recession. And so how do we really incentivize our developers to build during these times? Based on the last recession we went through in the Bay Area, we saw that it stopped. And so, they may be planning all these things, but in reality, we won't be able to build if we don't incentivize developers to do that. The entitlements versus, the construction. Yes, a lot of our cities have done the entitlements, but we have not been able to build these residential units. The negative impact on school districts, again, where the focus is solely on building housing. Another concern is these bills, even though, they should be promoting and encouraging building more affordable housing, when you actually look at what they're doing and what they're really incentivizing are building more market rate homes. And so that, again, only benefits the developers. We're also concerned about how a lot of these bills are gutting or fast tracking the CEQA process, which could have negative impacts and weaken our environmental protections. We want to recognize that we're also struggling and have challenges with the political will in our communities. The one size fits all that we've talked about and we mentioned in our letters, but to that point, there's so many cities in our county where a lot of these bills would just not be feasible. And then the last thing that was discussed was, how is transportation really defined and what is viable transportation? And so we'll put all these things in a letter with the board's approval and hopefully get it out tomorrow and see if, this letter could give some direction or have some positive impact on the bills.
Okay.
And then the other thing we discussed was AB 2167, which is the insurance market plan bill. We did not take a position on the bill, but we had a really good discussion of the pros and cons. And so the idea is each council can still consider this. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's continue on. Next up is a Transportation Committee update.
So Chair, do we need a motion approving us sending the letter?
Thank you very much.
I move to approve. Mariko?
Thank
I'll
you.
second Mary Lynn.
Thanks. Andy, may we have a roll call vote?
Yes, Campbell,
Aye.
Cupertino,
Aye.
Gilroy,
Yes.
Los Altos,
Aye.
Los Altos Hills, absent Los Gatos,
Yes.
Milpitas,
Aye.
Montecito, absent Morgan Hill. Did we lose Rich?
He was here.
Okay. Mountain View,
Aye.
Palo Alto. Liz? You're on
You're muted.
mute.
Yes.
Okay, San Jose, absent. Santa Clara.
Yes.
Rich, not to put you on the spot, but are you in favor of sending the letter we discussed at the LAC meeting on housing?
Yeah, my computer just died, so I just had to sign on my iPad. So yes.
Yes, okay, great. Actually, this is a vote about whether you're buying us all dinner next time we meet.
What happens when my battery dies, huh?
Drinks too.
Oh, boy.
Saratoga.
I don't.
Aye.
Sunnyvale.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Still
you.
12 ayes and still 3 absent.
Okay. And next up is our Transportation Committee. Margaret, did you want to start us off or thank you.
But before I do, there's a hand up in the attendee box. I don't know if you want to check on that.
Oh,
Oh, I looked into it. Someone does want to speak with the commute pledge. We can
Okay.
get to that.
Great, thank you. So thank you, everyone. So I chair the Transportation Subcommittee for our association, and I'm joined with Larry Klein, Rod Sinks, Liz Niss, Rich Constantine, Gustav Larson, and Kat Tucker. And earlier in the year, we met to talk about what issues we would like to cover. And we're able to have presentations on 2 of the items this evening. The first one is on alternative funding models for transportation. And if I may, I'd like to ask Rod to do the introductions of our guest speaker this evening.
Yeah, thank you. As you will recall, in the beginning of the year, we had a measure that was proposed to increase sales tax to raise $100 billion over 40 years. And some of us got to the point where we said, we think that the measures that we have that are funding transportation in the Bay Area, this may be a faster measure, but it's not necessarily fair. And we understand that most all the measures except for the new measure RR for Caltrain are going to be are off the table for this year. But this subcommittee wanted to start a conversation around measures that we think are more progressive, that would allow us to think about what other communities, Portland as an example, have done to raise money for transportation. William Sundstrom is a professor of economics at Santa Clara University. His research interests include poverty and inequality, the economic history of labor markets, education, race and gender, and he teaches courses in data analysis and econometrics. And we've asked him here this evening to get our minds thinking about the topic of, for example, how would we raise $100 billion over 40 years by means other than, say, a sales tax or bridge tolls and that sort of thing. So, Bill, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Rod. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to offer just a few kind of remarks as food for thought for you all. I'm a bit of a newcomer to some of the local issues. I would say a lot of my work has been more at a kind of a national level, looking at a number of these kind of inequality issues. But I've recently gotten quite interested in exploring what's going on in the Valley here and thinking about housing questions. And in particular, these kind of economic justice questions really are my main interest. So I'm eager to hear what you think and hopefully just sort of push a few thoughts at you, both in terms of the broader context of these questions of transit funding. They apply to other areas of local and regional funding as well, I think, and hope it's useful. So I'm going to share some slides here if I can figure out how to do that. I should say that just for this occasion, I had my first haircut today in 5 months. So I hope you all appreciate that.
you should be able to share, Bill.
Let me get this.
If you're not able to, let me know. But there we go.
You're good.
Now let's see if I can do the full screen here. Whoops. How's that? Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So let me just get started. I've pitched this. Let me go back to the first slide there. Funding Bay Area transit infrastructure with an eye toward fairness. I want to really stress that question of that Rod raised in his introduction of how to think about whether there are fairer or more progressive ways to do the funding that we do in local government. I think, you know, it's not going to be any big surprises to anybody that a lot of the way we do business at the local level tends to be fairly regressive in its revenue stream, and maybe there are alternatives that we can think about, at least over time. So I'm going to ask this question, you know, what is fairness in transit funding? What do I mean by fairness? Just very briefly, I'm thinking of fairness in the broad sense of distributional fairness or economic justice, the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and have-nots. And I think, you know, one thing to think about is that local public transit already is providing subsidized services that go a long way toward offsetting inequality. We have bus systems that really serve low-income folks, and a number of other things about our transit systems already are progressive in that sense. And so should we worry so much about the funding stream as well, the taxation side of things? Should that be asked to do even more in terms of sort of local economic justice? As economists, we tend to think, well, let's separate out these things. Let's raise the money in the most efficient way we can, and then let's spend it wisely. And if we're really worried about these large redistributional issues, let's let the feds do that, or, you know, people who have their hands on a lot of the levers of redistribution. I think we have to move beyond that view now, and I'm going to, you know, put up just a couple of pictures about broad inequality, both in the region and nationally. And I'm sure you've all seen pictures like this, but I can't stress enough how the situation we find ourselves in at this point in history is really unusual and extreme. So this is the income share of the top 1% in the United States and in California over the past century. And you can see, you know, many of you know the story that since over the roughly last 30 to 40 years, the share of the top 1% has doubled from about 10% to about 20% of income in the United States. This is a trend that we're still debating about why it has happened. There's lots of views, and some of them policy related, some not, but it's a fact that we have to live with now. And it's one that has a national pattern. California here is in red. This is data from the Economic Policy Institute. And if anything, the trends are a little bit more severe in California. So I think the question of, well, let's let somebody else deal with the inequality problem is not something that we can afford to just sort of sit back and wait for that to happen. Inequality in our region is also extreme. So we all know this is the richest place on earth, the real economic dynamo. Our county GDP, or San Jose Metro GDP, exceeds $300 billion a year. The per capita level is huge. But when we look at some of these measures of inequality, we find that this region also ranks among the most unequal places in the country, and by some measures, the most unequal metro area in California. Numbers are always so striking, right? So the average annual income of the top 1% of income earners in our county is $3.5 million. The average for the rest of the folks is pretty good, 100,000, but that ratio between the two is on the order of 35, which is more than double the ratio in the typical metro area in the US. So we are very unequal. The other thing that is worth stressing, and I'm sure this is also, no real news to most people, is that not only is the divide between the top and the bottom very large here, but the degree of deprivation of folks who are at the bottom of the income distribution is worse than we would like to think. And I cite here the California Poverty Measure, which is a measure of poverty like the official poverty measure, but adjusted for things like local cost of living. And our poverty rate in this county is higher than the US average by that measure. So we are really living in a place that has lots of these kinds of economic justice problems. And that raises to me the question, well, how can we think about designing all of our policies, at least with an eye toward these fairness concerns. It's never going to be the only or even necessarily the most important issue, but because taxes offer a pretty powerful lever on distributive dimensions, it's always worth thinking, I think, even in our kind of local and regional decisions, how to address those questions. So when we as economists, think about tax policy, we, think about several main objectives. Obviously, the whole point of taxes is to raise revenue for important public purposes. So that's, point one there. What I'm going to call efficiency, which I'll speak to in a minute, has to do with whether the taxes have how much of a dampening effect they might have on economic activity, the size of the pie, if you will. These fairness and equity concerns that I'm really stressing here. And then related to the efficiency question, the idea of using taxation or fees as incentives to alter behavior, and in particular to discourage social bads. It's the kinds of things I have in mind are the things like carbon and congestion taxes. Those obviously play into the transit nexus. I'm not going to talk anything about that here, but certainly important questions to consider in regional policy as well. Very briefly, I don't want to get, be giving an Econ 1 lecture here. When we say tax efficiency, there are a couple of issues here that are important to this conversation. It really has to do with raising the revenue with sort of minimal waste. And there are really two core principles, many of you may know these, that come out of the tax literature in economics. One is that a principle is to broaden the tax base. So we want to tax widely across a variety of markets, and that really speaks to the kinds of taxes that we're familiar with: broad-based sales taxes, income taxes, payroll taxes, which I will talk about, which affect a broad swath of economic activity, tend to be more efficient. Other things equal, the second principle is that we want to try to focus, if we're going to focus taxes on certain activities, we'd like to be focused on the activities that are not going to be very sensitive to taxation. And that's what we call inelastic markets. And I think in the local and regional context, what we're really talking about here is trying to design tax systems that avoid what often gets called leakage. We don't want to be taxing heavily activities that can just run and move away. And this is the whole sort of conservative argument that taxes can drive business out of a region. And it's really a question of how big are those effects, right? And we want to try to minimize those. The classic lesson of that core principle number two comes to us from, well over 100 years ago. Henry George, the great American economist, who argued that the very best tax you could have would be a tax on land value, not the improvements. So not the house that's sitting on the land, but the property value of that piece of square footage. And he argued with quite successfully that this would be the most efficient tax, and also one that probably has good equity properties. I'd love to see a world in which we could think about doing that. It's probably not one that we can think about here within the context of Prop 13, but an interesting idea. And that's kind of typical of that way of thinking. Tax fairness, I really want to focus on this question of vertical fairness, these kinds of distributional concerns. How does the tax system affect people at different levels of the income distribution? And everybody is aware of the kind of the progressive taxation idea that, other things equal, we'd think it's just that the higher income entities should pay a higher percentage in taxes. Not everyone agrees with that, but that's kind of a premise I will accept here. And one thing that is really worth stressing is that the degree of progressivity or regressivity, the opposite, varies a lot across different types of taxes. So as we think about what is the tax system we want to move toward for either national, state, or local revenue raising, it's worth really looking at these distributional impacts. Again, not the only thing, but an important thing. State and local tax systems in the United States tend to be, on average, regressive. So this is information that comes out of the oops, sorry, lost it there. Think tank ITEP that does careful analyses of these. And in the US as a whole, you'll see this is the bars here are the quintiles of the income distribution. So this is the lowest 20% of taxable income earners here, and they tend to be taxed at the highest rate by state and local entities in the US. And the bars marching downward from left to right is regressivity, right? So the higher your income, the lower the effective tax rate from state and local entities. Now, California is an interesting case, and in fact, by their measure, is the most progressive state in terms of state and local tax. And you can see it's kind of a mixed bag. Low-income folks are taxed fairly heavily, but there's a kind of progressivity at the higher end, right? So once you get up to the top 1% in California, this is why my parents retired to Florida. We're at 12% effective tax rate for just the state and local component as a percentage of income. But I should say, if I'm hoping I have a little bit of time to take some questions at the end, so store up your questions. Now, why is it that California looks that way? And here's where this is, to me, the kind of the money slide of this presentation, thanks to the ITEP people. We have a mix of state and local taxes, and the sales and excise taxes, which are, you know, the bread and butter of county and local government to a considerable extent, is a pretty regressive tax, right? And everybody, I think, knows this, but it is strongly regressive in practice. Property taxes in the lower left here, the fact that the bars are kind of sort of level, a little bit downward sloping, suggests that the property tax is more or less neutral as it's worked out in California. And that may have something to do with the sort of the grandfathering in that comes from Prop 13. What saves California from a progressivity point of view is the state's personal income tax, which is echoing some aspects of the federal income tax is rather progressive. So taken all together, California comes out looking, in terms of state and local, not so bad. I don't want to claim that this is a new discovery, right? That sales taxes are regressive, right? So here are two quotes from local luminaries on the recent discussion of raising the county sales tax to deal with the current fiscal crises that we're anticipating. And Joe Simidian, you know, says doesn't mitigate income inequality, it actually exacerbates it by taking more money out of the pockets of folks who can least afford it. Cindy Chavez responds, well, yeah, but this is such a historic crisis. We may well have to bite the bullet and get this money because the spending purposes are so progressive and important that we have to do it. So I'm not making any original claims here by any means. I think everybody knows this. But looking forward, there may be needs for emergency funding to deal with the shortfalls that are going to arise as a consequence of the COVID recession or depression. But as we look forward to things like broad financing of transit infrastructure, are there alternatives? And Rod and I have talked a bit about this. And so I want to, you know, raise just a couple of, this is the sort of the food for thought section. Could the same amount of money that's needed, large amounts of funding to build a much more rational and effective regional transit system, come from other sources than sales taxes, as has been often proposed and implemented? What would you tax? Well, we could imagine taxing income, wealth, land. As I've mentioned, land actually has some desirable properties, but is pretty hard to do in the current context. Wealth, big player in the earlier parts of the Democratic primary race. The question of a wealth tax as opposed to an income tax. At a local level, wealth tax seems very easily avoided by the wealthy and probably is kind of a non-starter. So we're left with various versions of taxing income, and an important version of that would be something like a payroll tax, right? Which is just basically add up what people are getting paid by employers and tax based on that. And that is indeed how Portland finances to a considerable extent its regional transit system, the TriMet. And they currently, their tax, payroll tax that they're collecting from employers there is on the order of 0.8%, right? So that's the Portland payroll tax. And it's, you know, a payroll tax is very much, we're all familiar with that. That's the FICA tax, the Social Security tax. So it's basically just a flat tax rate taken from employee, in this case, employer payrolls. How much revenue would this raise in the Bay Area if we just adopted Portland's 0.8%? And I don't have, this is very seat of the pants, back of the envelope calculation, but I think it's right in the ballpark. If you took the 9 Bay Area counties, the total wage and salary income, according to the IRS, in recent times was on the order of $330 billion. Let's tax that, consider that the payroll at a constant 0.8%. And we end up with, lo and behold, just about $100 billion over 4, which is, you know, closer than I would have expected. This is not sort of cooking the books here. It is very comparable to the estimated revenue that the FASTER proposal had for a 1% sales tax hike to raise funds for transit. So in other words, I mean, it's not surprising because in some sense, these two forms of taxing are in some ways they're attacking the same overall range of economic activity, which is either what people are getting paid or what they're spending. But because spending, people who have low incomes tend to spend a higher percentage of their income, the sales tax has a more regressive impact. Now, what I don't have a good answer for is what would this picture look like for that payroll tax? And I wish I did. That would be an excellent little research project for me to engage in. My guess is, you know, if you thought you're taxing at 0.8% everybody, it's going to look pretty flat across the income distribution rather than regressive. But we do know that the US payroll tax, the FICA, is really considered regressive. And the reason is, although it is a flat rate, it has an earnings cap that's fairly low. So the very rich, even the moderately rich, don't pay beyond a certain point in terms of the FICA. So I would just say that a whole lot of the devil is in the details in thinking about alternative taxation schemes, whose earnings are covered, to what extent is that payroll tax passed on to workers or absorbed maybe by the purchasers of the goods they produce or the owners of the firms. Economists tend to think workers pay most of the payroll tax, by the way, for reasons I could discuss. Would it be possible to do something more like a graduated or progressive payroll tax? Complicated because then you need to tie it to the incomes of the workers who are paying in. Is there some role for rebates or transfers to redistribute money back to folks? All I'm really raising here is the notion that if there were a broad-based payroll tax at a flat rate without a cap, it seems quite likely to me that that's going to be considerably more progressive, or at least less regressive, than would be the equivalent sales tax. And then we have questions that I'll skip over for now so I can kind of get to a conclusion about the leakage questions, right? So if we tax heavily using a sales tax, or raise the sales tax by 1%, or raise a payroll tax by something close to 1%, what's the impact? And is it differential across those kinds of alternative taxes? And my gut as an economist is that leakage questions are not that different between them, and that they're not that severe. I think we can afford to impose these kinds of taxes if these are high priorities for us to raise money for worthwhile transit projects. So I will just close here in sum. Local and regional taxation, revenue raising, really should take account of the impact on income distribution, especially given inequality trends and the fact that up to this point, the federal government and even the state government have really not gotten it done in terms of addressing underlying causes of trends or reversing them through some type of redistributive policies. Sales taxes are quite regressive in practice. We know that. What we need to think about is, can we do better? Are there alternatives? I'm suggesting there could be. I think it requires additional research to see just how less regressive they are and how feasible they are. And I put up these little pictures at the bottom because no matter how you raise the money, it matters a lot how you spend it, right? And so I'm agnostic at this point about whether huge transit infrastructure expenditures are the best possible use of large tax revenues, but I think we need to think carefully about how that gets done, however we're going to spend the money. That's not going to be, we'll have plenty of uses for more public funds. So I'll stop there. I'm not sure how much time I took, but I'm sure I'm running up against my time limit. And thank you all for your attention. I'm happy to take questions if there's time. I've shared the slides with Andy, so you can look and see where the sources are for the couple of graphs I have, and look forward to your reactions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And definitely it was great presentation. And we do have about 10 minutes for questions. So if anyone has questions, please raise your virtual hand.
How about my other hand?
Real hand?
Could I raise my other hand?
Yes, go right ahead, Liz.
Great. That was such a good presentation. But the last aspect that you spoke of, good haircut, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I got it in Midtown Palo Alto. You'll be glad to know. So
I am so glad to know.
and they were happy to see me after 5 months.
God. I just got back and I thought, where am I going to get my haircut? So for years, we have talked about what would happen if X tax finally just forced all the businesses out of the Bay Area. And what's interesting is we have such an incredible number of businesses here. Way back when, there was a study done comparing Route 128 in Boston with the Valley here, and why people stay. And one of their theories was that people like to be where other people are, where they can run into them, exchange ideas, and if they get fired, they can walk across the street and get another job. Can you comment on the taxes versus the businesses, especially those that are in our valley, that you could think of?
Comment on, sorry,
what is your take on if we got the taxes to the point? What's that breaking point?
Yeah.
Where suddenly companies say we're off to Vegas.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we know. Here I'm gonna punt as a good academic. I don't think we know the answer to that. I think all the evidence we have is that we haven't seen this kind of flight. I think that the study you're referring to, comparing us to Route 128, had more to do with sort of the ecosystem of the locations rather than anything to do with public policy per se. And I think there's every reason
You're right.
There's every reason to think that those strong, what we call agglomeration economies and economics are still vibrant. Now, I think where I thought you might be going with the question is in the world of post-COVID, where we're all on Zoom and we don't need to be going to the same coffee shop in Sunnyvale or wherever it is, and we don't need to be at the same incubator space. Is that going to radically change those agglomeration economies? And I think that's an open question. I have no idea what the answer is to that. I mean, I'm an old guy, so I still sort of feel we're going to go back to wanting to be in the same place.
I think we will.
But I don't have any way of knowing that. And my sense is the experience we have is that despite all the ongoing warnings about taxes driving Silicon Valley under, we have anything but that experience. What's more likely to drive us under is things like housing costs, and we all know that those are equally important, if not more so than the taxation burden.
I agree with you at some point. Well, in fact, I even want to see the guys on this screen, and it's in about 6 months. So that tells you eventually you want to see everybody again. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Rod has been having some technical difficulties, but Rod, you had a question?
Yeah, no, Bill, I just really wanted to thank you. Yeah, I don't have a button to turn on video, so you'll have to deal with the little square of me. I note if all you include is wage and salary, that probably doesn't include incentive stock options, which make up a lot of compensation here, right? Capital appreciation of those options. And I would also note that in the greater Portland area, as in all of Oregon, there are no sales taxes whatsoever, right? So you could actually unburden businesses if you chose to, if you were thinking strategically about reforming things. I realize that's a bigger discussion, but anyway, I just wanted to thank you so much on behalf of the committee for coming and talking to us tonight. It's a discussion worth continuing. Thanks.
Thank you, Rod. And you're quite right. The wage and salary number I was sort of using for the little calculation, I don't believe includes stock options and those kinds of compensation. And of course, it doesn't include income from investments, so capital income. You could imagine an income tax. I think that the beauty of the payroll tax is in the convenience of collecting it, right? So we have very good state level mechanisms for collecting payroll taxes. You just have to go to the employer. You don't have to be getting individuals to file tax returns. And I presume that's part of the reason that Oregon and Portland have found that an attractive approach. It has some limitations in terms of how you can make it more progressive.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Stephen Sharf.
Oh, hi. Am I unmuted here? Let me
Yes,
make
you
sure.
are.
Great. So yeah, thank you for your presentation, and you got your haircut. I have enough hair to cover my bald spot now, so that's a plus of not getting a haircut. So I think one issue is not knowing what the future reality is in terms of transportation and housing choices, given remote work, the future of remote working. These are not temporary changes. If you just saw what happened in Seattle area with REI deciding they're abandoning their brand new campus that they built because they realized there is just no need for office space and for everyone to commute into a central location. So I just wonder, it's probably too early to really know what the long-term future is, but when we talk to developers of housing and office space, they are very concerned that this massive amount of housing and office under construction in the Bay Area especially is not going to bring them the returns that they had dreamed of. So have you looked into any of that?
As I said, I would be pure speculation. I agree with you. It's a super interesting and important question. You've got that Apple thing behind your head there in your background, and I see all the Google construction going on down at Moffett, and it certainly raises the question: is any of that stuff ever going to be occupied, and by whom? So I guess I would be reluctant to advise any any agencies in the area to jump on raising a whole bunch of new revenue to build all sorts of infrastructure when we're not quite sure how things shake out. I'm skeptical we're all going to end up online, but it's a very valid question.
And of course you got to get these taxes to pass too. I mean, the faster Bay Area, they withdrew it because their polling showed there was just little chance of that getting approved.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I wish I knew. I don't have a good model for that.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Carmen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, William, for that great presentation. It was very, very enlightening. Our city council just passed a sales tax of 1/4 cent. And you mentioned that these sales tax are regressive. Can you expand on that? And the reason why we're passing it is because of COVID. Many of our businesses have closed down. Our TOT, transit occupational taxes, have gone down, and rarely do we get folks coming and using our hotels. We have about 13 or 14 hotels, so that has really cut into our stream of sales taxes. So if you can expand on that regressive sales taxes. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic insight is fairly common sense, which is that you know, sales tax is collected on things that people are purchasing, and people who have lower income spend most of their income, you know, maybe paycheck to paycheck, on things that get taxed. And so the percentage of their income or expenditure that's subject to this taxation is greater than it is for someone who's wealthier, saving a lot, maybe spending on some things that are not local and maybe not subject to the sales tax. So, you know, the overall impact just ends up being that for typical sales taxes, low income folks pay a higher percentage of their income toward sales taxes than higher income folks. I mean, I don't want to push too hard on this idea that sales taxes are evil, because, you know, they are super important sources of local revenue. They have some desirable properties. They are broad-based. They affect lots of people or businesses in the community in a fairly equitable fashion in that sense. It's just that my sort of argument is, if we have, you know, larger scale, longer term projects where we could think about alternatives that have better impacts on high income versus low income folks, we should be sort of actively pursuing those options. So I don't know if that answers your question, because I'm certainly sympathetic to the binds that lots of local governments are going to be in terms of the revenue gap. It's just it's daunting for sure.
It is daunting.
I should make one more point, which is, it's not just how you raise the money, of course, but how you spend it. So maybe the sales tax is regressive, but if we turn around and take that bunch of money and devote it toward the people who are struggling most, and health services, et cetera, you know, that goes a long way toward reversing the impact, I think.
Yeah, and that's why I approved it, because it goes in our general fund. It's a general tax. It's 1/4 of 1 cent, and it's to preserve core services to our city. And we also have a rent relief program. So we have some social service programs, and those monies can go into that pot to help those folks. So this is why I said yes to it. So like I said, it's only 1/4 cent, and the way I see it is the consumer has the choice of whether to spend something or not to spend something on. So anyway, thank you for your presentation. It really was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret?
Thank you for the great presentation. So in our city, we recently did a business license tax, made it progressive, we revised it. But in that debate, we had business advocates who came to and suggested a payroll tax, and then other business folks who came and suggested a gross receipts tax. And I was curious to hear from you what your thoughts are on those two, comparing those two, and how in particular with the gross receipts tax, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, the gross receipts tax is an interesting thing. You know, I mean, it's interesting to me in part because, you know, in my training as an economist, this is not something anybody in economics typically talks much about. Is this? And it's an old idea that kind of went out of favor for a while and has come back. There are a number of concerns that economists raise about gross receipts taxes that they may end up taxing some activities sort of twice, you know, once in the business to business phase, and then later on in the out to the customer phase. You know, sometimes these taxes end up being not that different from a sales tax, right? So if you think like in Europe, they've got value added taxes, and they're adding taxation along the sort of supply chain, but when you add it all up, it really ends up being more or less equivalent to a sales tax from the consumer end of things. So I think that's an interesting question. Then these kinds of things like licensing fees are more targeted, and I think it's a very good question whether that kind of targeted thing where you can do something to make it more progressive, charge more to larger entities or more profitable entities, et cetera, offsets some of the narrowness of it, because we do think broader taxes generally are better. And then it'll be interesting to find out whether your experience is that some businesses actually, depart town, or whether that was all a bunch of bluster, right? So it's an interesting question. I don't have a good answer to how those things play out relative to each other.
I wouldn't say it's the business license tax. I think it's more COVID right now. That's
yes.
determining where businesses.
We don't have a good controlled situation here.
But thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Margaret. And finally, Jan Pepper.
Thank you for your presentation. That was really interesting. And I had never thought of sales taxes being regressive, but appreciate learning that tonight. You just briefly mentioned the value added tax, and I've heard of those, and also consumption taxes. Would those end up having the same results as a sales tax in terms of the impact on percentage of someone's income?
Yeah, I think that probably depends on how they're implemented. But basically, in the sort of the macro sense, I think that a value-added tax and a consumption tax and a very broad-based sales tax end up looking quite similar to each other, because they really are, in the end, trying to tax as much as possible of the spending stream of individuals. The value-added tax is a little different, as I say, because it's accrued across a supply chain, but in the end, it adds up to an additional price that the consumers are having to pay. So that's there's a because of their efficiency of those things, there are a lot of economists who are very sympathetic to one version or another of a consumption tax, a value-added tax. Another thing about those taxes is because they don't, unlike an income tax, they don't tax the savings part, right? So if I earn a bunch of money this year and I put 40% of it into the bank, if I were getting charged a consumption tax, I'd only be charged on the 60% that I'm spending this year, and the 40% is untaxed. And so there's a kind of at least alleged encouragement of savings and investment. Now, I think many of us are skeptical of how strong that effect is, but that's one argument that's sometimes made in favor of those things. So there are a lot of subtleties that I didn't get into, but I think by and large, the regressivity of the sales tax would probably largely be true of say a consumption tax, because low-income people are not saving very much. Almost all of their income is going into that consumption stream that then all gets taxed. That's sort of my punch.
Thank you very much, Bill. And thanks. It's a great discussion. I think, definitely there's a lot of good information here. And as you hear from our members, our board members, definitely there's a lot of interest in looking at ways to make this equitable in today's environment, as well as what's the best funding sources for transportation, and trying to look at new ideas that the best thing to do is steal the good ideas from other cities around the country. And I appreciate that information. And thank you, Rod, for bringing the speaker here, because I think it was very useful.
Well, thank you all, and good luck dealing with the incredible challenges now. I mean, I have a lot of respect for all you folks out there trying to keep things together. It's a real challenge. So appreciate your work. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next up, we will continue with transportation and talk about Cut the Commute Pledge. Margaret?
Thank you. I'll just kick it off, and I know many of the members here have been a part of this effort, so would love to have others chime in. But I serve on the Air Quality Management District with Rod Sinks, who is our current chair, and Liz Niss, and our fourth member from the county is County Supervisor Cindy Chavez. And I actually want to give her credit for this concept of cut the commute. It came about, I would say, because she's also the chair of VTA this year, as well as president of the county's Board of Supervisors. And wearing all three hats, she began a discussion about, with COVID and sheltering in place, the benefits of lower traffic congestion and how that has improved air quality. And it's quite noticeable, as you all probably have noticed. And so that began this dialogue about the benefits of telecommuting and how we could potentially maintain some level of telecommuting even after sheltering in place is lifted as a mechanism to improve our air quality and the environment. And so we've been meeting almost every Saturday through the summer. We've been able to actually cut that back to maybe every other Saturday now, and have worked on this what's been drafted is a pledge and also a resolution, draft resolution. So the ask is that all public agencies look at their own city or agency policies to encourage telecommuting for their own employees. And then in addition to that, we have a complimentary pledge that we are looking to get companies over, I believe, 50 employees to sign on to. And the goal, the preliminary goal is to get a 25% reduction in, and this is tied to, the real goal is to reduce single occupancy vehicles. And so this pledge was, the campaign was launched about a month ago. I was able to get our city of Mountain View to pass a resolution to sign on to this effort. And the ask this evening is that the Cities Association also signs on to the pledge. And then we would ask every one of the representatives here to take it back to each of your cities to have your city councils adopt a resolution or a referral, however your cities do that. So I think it was in your packet. There's actually, and I'm sorry I didn't include it.
Do you want me to share, Margaret?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, which part would you like me to do? The pledge first?
Sure, yes, the pledge is
okay.
shorter. So this one is and they actually would be happy for all of our cities and agencies to sign on to this pledge, but this one is the one aimed towards companies. And so the request is that we sign on to it ourselves, and then we try to reach out to many of our companies in our cities to encourage them to also sign on. And then the other attachment, which I think there are some links, but I did include, and I can send or have Andy send this out later, but this was our resolution for the city of Mountain View, and we added specifics of our own city, but it's a model that I think other cities could easily use.
So if Margaret, if everyone would like to, if they decide they'd like to sign on to this, or I can send everything that you sent me to all the staff and board members.
Thank you. So happy if any of the other members would like to chime in, that's great, and happy to take any questions.
Can I also just want to mention that, I'll stop the share. We also, if you look at the agenda page on our website, if that's how you're viewing the agenda, I did add a link and I did send an email to notify you that we received a number of emails and from citizens in support of you signing the pledge.
Yes, and I think there's someone in our attendee box too, or a couple. So fortunately, we've had the interest of environmental groups, and we are trying to work with them. We've asked them to reach out to their members in the various, all of our cities, to encourage your councils, your colleagues, to also look at adopting this this pledge. And 350 Bay Area, I want to especially acknowledge them. They actually, I'll say it, they probably they do want us to go even further, but we wanted to be mindful of especially the companies. I think right now they're just all trying to figure out what's going to happen, and so their willingness to commit might not be as solid at this point, but we thought 25% was a good starting point, and hopefully we can ratchet that up.
Thank you, Margaret. And I won't add anything, maybe a little bit later in summary, but I think you captured the main goal of what we're trying to do here is take advantage of transportation during the response or kind of the recovery of COVID-19, and as we're looking forward to how we can continue to maintain good air quality and less transportation effects as much as possible. This is one possible resolution and way of moving forward. We have several questions. First up is Liz Nis. And unmute. Go ahead.
And, I think Rich is still on, but we discussed this afternoon at the policy meeting. And I have a couple of comments that aren't negative. In fact, they're kind of neutral, but I think they're a challenge. When we say cut the commute, what we're really saying is, depending on which way you look at it, is you may say, put more people in one car. And right now that's a real no-no, because most of us at least are trying really hard to separate. And the second one comes from transit. And I know transit is doing what they can, but also at this point, a number of people are very nervous about riding transit. So I just took the big transit guy in the sky, and went back and forth to Massachusetts. And most of my friends said, oh my God, I wouldn't do that. So I think we need to look at this in terms of COVID. And as we go into the future, which doesn't mean I don't support it. I love the blue skies, but there are those two aspects of it that I think we need to keep in mind as we go forward. Done.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Next up is Paul Resnikoff.
Thank you, Larry. Hey, Margaret, a couple of questions and a comment. The question is, when you looked at this in the council, did you take the 25%, which I see in the staff report, was that a guideline, and then say what can we as a city propose and what works here? It wasn't a set pledge for that. It was the concept is good, but now how do we implement it?
Yes, so the 25% really comes from the campaign,
Okay.
and we looked at it as, and it's a goal, frankly. But I did ask, and our city staff had already been looking at continuing telecommuting in some form, and I guess I should mention that. This group that meets on Saturdays, it's comprised of various stakeholders. We have MTC and ABAG and other county reps, as well as VTA has been represented, Liz. So we have talked about the effects on transit, and that will be an ongoing discussion about how we do want to continue to support transit. And so this is really about trying to reduce single occupancy vehicles. And you're right now, carpooling is not a good thing to do. So that's why we're focused on telecommuting and just making that a policy for all of our agencies to have, a portion, at least a portion of our staff to be able to telecommute. And,
Okay, because the comment is, this is a good time for this because,
yes.
Prior to the pandemic, I knew people in high tech who said, I can't telecommute because of so important and I must meet people. I did this at home for 10 or 11 years, so I've always done it. And also the city, of course, never had anybody telecommute. We now have a lot of employees still out of the city hall, which is a lot, obviously. And I do know people personally who now, where prior to this could not telecommute, their company won't allow it, it can't happen, and they're not going back. And they've adopted quite well to it. So I think timing wise, this is the opportunity to get people to continue to stay home who didn't think they could, and there's a lot of flexibility. So I think it's a good idea. I don't know from a city standpoint if 25% is doable, but some percentage is doable, and in the past it was 0.
Yes.
So success doing some of it. So I think it's a good idea to pursue. I just don't know what the number is for our city to sign up.
So again, it's a goal. It's not a set number, and every agency is different. So whatever works for you is what. But we just want to, like you said, just make it a policy, a new policy. And you're absolutely right. This is a totally different world, and we're trying to take the opportunity to. And we're looking at city service delivery and how we change things because. We've always had people come to us. We can't do that anymore. How do we go outward? How do we allow for flexibility for our city staff? Because we were losing staff to high costs of living and commutes and congestion too. And so this is just another, a tool for us to be able to recruit and retain is how we look at it. And you're right, this is the opportunity because, we want to get this going and, pretty far along before sheltering in place is completely lifted because I don't know if we'd be able to do this if, we're back to how it was before.
Correct. I think there's a time here real briefly. And I was over at the West Valley Sanitation District this morning. I had to sign some documents. It's rare time when you have to go in person, right? And
yes.
I commented to them, did you ever think that you could lock your doors, keep people home and continue to do all the business of the district? And they didn't, and yet they are. So it is doable to some extent, but I think now's the time to move forward. I agree with this.
Thank you. And one more thing I wanted to mention is there's been polling done about telecommuting and the views of employees and workers. It's national, and we got some of that data at our meetings. And most employees want to be able to work from home at least one day a week. Maybe not every day, but 1 or 2 days a week. So, the interest is high and it's there. So
and the last comment is, with children not going back to school, it's critical in some cases. People are talking about leaving their jobs to stay at home with their kids, and that's a horrible choice.
Right. Yes. Sorry, I'm talking too much. I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. We'll go ahead and move to the public. Oh, wait, sorry. There's a few more people. Carmen?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Margaret, for being on that subcommittee, the Transportation Subcommittee. You mentioned that the main focus is to promote to get rid of single occupancy in vehicles, right? So what comes to my mind is that fast track. The fast track, that's when people just pay to be able to have the privilege of, driving on that fast track lane. So how do you address that fast track concept?
So that's a bigger conversation, to be frank. This is really focused on telecommuting, but I will just say, like from my own experience in our city, we're looking at other transportation demand management tools, such as congestion pricing, which is what fast track is. As well as parking, reducing parking or charging for parking. And, these are all just ways to incentivize less cars coming into our cities to work, for commuting. So yeah, it's actually a bigger conversation, and we'd have to, I think at some point we could talk about TDM measures, which are going to be harder to implement, frankly. So we just wanted to capitalize on this opportunity with sheltering in place on telecommuting and trying to solidify a telecommuting policy in as many of our agencies as possible.
Okay, I'll take that answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Kathy. Bodnari?
Thank you. Yep, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Margaret. I just have two quick questions. Margaret, is there a timeline or a goal that to implement this or hear back from cities?
I don't think we've set any timeline. We do, as I mentioned, we are still meeting regularly once every couple of weeks to get updates or update the group on where we are. My feeling though is that we really need to get most of this in place before sheltering in place is lifted. Because I really believe that once things, go back to some kind of normal, it's going to be really hard to push this.
I agree. And the reason I ask is we're on break. We're technically on break still, but we have our first council meeting next Tuesday night. And I know our agenda has come out, so I won't be able to get this on the agenda, but I'll get it in there for, we meet again on the 25th. So get it in there as soon as possible so we can talk about it. Yep.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think if we could take the fall and I would say before the end of the year, if we could get it done, that would be fantastic.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Nisa?
Thanks, Chair. I guess I'm speaking as a member of the public because John is a representative on this committee. But I want to first thank Margaret and the rest of the team for working on this. I'm very excited and I'm very supportive of this direction. I will say a lot of the discussion, at least on the tech company side, and I know this is a proposal for our public agencies, is really not rushing anything because like everything else we've talked about, we really don't know the impact of telecommuting. And so I know a lot of companies do not want to make a permanent shift to telecommuting until we have had enough time to assess the impacts. And so I've not looked at the language, Margaret, I've not looked at your packet, but the only thing I hope it includes is some flexibility because there's some employees need or want to actually go into the office and there are benefits that a lot of companies are looking at if you have employees coming into the office. So I support the concept, but I hope there is flexibility built in and we're not rushing, because there's so many benefits we're seeing right now from telecommuting to do something that may not have the, long-term positive impact that we don't know yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think we have been trying to build that flexibility. So the goal is again a goal. Certainly we will adjust accordingly, but we are doing, we're actually going to be going out for a poll. I don't know if Bachman's leading it, but we'll be doing some surveys and polls of companies and employees to really get a better understanding of where this all is. But it's really just a starting point to say, let's make telecommuting a policy that we can all implement in some form, as long as it works for us. And I think this is proven, sheltering in place has proven that. Frankly, I just thought most companies allowed it because my husband's telecommuted for 20 years practically, and I realized that's not the case. And now, I think more folks are convinced that it can work. So that's what we're trying to take advantage of.
Great.
Okay, we'll move on to the members of the public. They'll have 90 seconds to speak. And Andy, if you can go ahead and start unmuting and acknowledging for me.
Hold on, I lost that screen. Mariko, can you help me? I just lost my participant screen for a second.
So first up I have is David.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
David Page.
Hi, everyone. This is David Page. I'm the co-chair of the Environmental Group 350 Silicon Valley Telework team. And I want to thank you all for looking into this issue about teleworking and working from home. And I want to thank you in advance for taking the proposal back to your city councils and spreading the information far and wide. I especially like to thank the people on the ad hoc committee that have been meeting on Saturdays. Mayor Scharf mentioned REI earlier. They announced their intentions to do a lot of remote work from here on out. And in their announcement, they said something about clean air, local pollution, but what gets left out of these announcements, and it was true in REI's situation, is that they don't talk about the climate problem. Climate pollution is just as big a benefit from all the people working from home as local pollution. And local pollution and the global atmosphere are not the same thing. So I'm hoping that when you go back to your cities and talk to your constituents, you can talk about the benefits from the global atmosphere having less pollution, as well as the local atmosphere. I appreciate you listening to me tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Next up is a caller with the ending number 4911. 831-201-4991.
They're muted. Hold on.
We tried to mute them and couldn't.
I think there must be multiple of us trying to unmute them.
Okay. I'm not trying to do anything.
I'm not touching it.
Let's move on to Gail Price for now. Oh.
Okay, I'll try again. My name is David. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, David.
Okay, excellent. I was having trouble unmuting. Anyway, David Bezanson. I work with David Page on the 350 Silicon Valley telecommuting team, and we've been taking a look at the world literature on remote work, which has been published over the last 40 years. And there are many, many thousands of publications on this topic. And there are varieties of policies from A to Z that we can follow. So there's a lot of room for flexibility here. The benefits are very appealing, and it's the most economical way of maintaining economic vitality while minimizing the pollution and the climate change impact from commuting. And it's a very effective way of decreasing VMT, which is particularly from combustion automobiles and single occupancy travel. And all that translates into lower number of vehicular accidents and lower morbidity and lower mortality, as well as improved air quality, which will attract more people to the area and help us to maintain our green reputation.
Thank you,
And
David.
if you have any questions about policies in general and how they could be adapted to your individual cities, just get back to us at the team and we can help you sort through the kind of things you want to know about it in order to make the policy effective for your unique situation.
Thank you very much. And we'll pass that on to all the members as we pass the resolution on to the different cities. Next up is Gail Price. You're
Good
already
evening.
muted.
Good evening. I'm Gail Price. I'm a former city council member from Palo Alto. I'm also participating in the 350 Silicon Valley telework group. I commend you on your thoughtful conversation this evening, and I'm a very strong proponent of the Cut the Commute pledge and the resolution. And I strongly urge you to adopt that, of course, and to work in a deliberate manner with your respective city councils. The only way there can be substantive change and action is if more and more people get involved in this. We are very delighted that there's a clearinghouse which collects pertinent information. I'm an ongoing proponent for looking at best practices elsewhere and working with that as a basis for changes within the Silicon Valley. We also recognize that not all workers would have the opportunity to do telework, but for those who can, or agencies and organizations who can promote it, it's really, really critical. I also want to say I agree with the comments made by Liz Nis, because this is not in isolation from the critical need for alternative mobility and funding Caltrain, because not everyone has the flexibility, as I mentioned, in their workplace to participate in just this single approach. Again, I commend you for your work and the ongoing activity. I'm very devoted to this work myself. I'm a former transportation planner as well. So thank you for working on this, and I will continue to be involved and support you in your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. Next up is Lisa Jackson.
Hello. So I'm from 350 Bay Area Transportation Team, and I want to thank the leadership team that put the pledge together and second a lot of the comments that have been made by Gail and David from the Silicon Valley team. So I just want to point out a couple of things. It's not very often that as climate activists, we get to basically talk about something that's great for the climate, but it's also great for businesses and for employees and for the general public as well. And this is one of those instances where that's true. You know, this is enabling people to change behavior, to telework. It changes their behavior, it changes what they do, and it has benefits all across the board. And, you know, for example, in the Bay Area, you know, the average commute, 1 in 12 workers, it takes them 90 minutes to get to and from work. With public transport being affected right now and people not wanting to use it as much as, you know, because of COVID, we see that this is a way to keep, you know, reducing the pollutants in the air, to keep reducing the GHGs in the air as well. And just an interesting point to add to what was already being said is MTC have a Plan Bay Area with 25 strategies for 2035, but they couldn't actually reduce their carbon footprint to meet the targets of the 19% reduction that was required by the state. But by looking at teleworking, they think now that they can actually help increase and reduce their GHG footprint in the Bay Area. So it's actually a big impact. And that's why we as an organization that looks at climate are really interested in supporting what's being brought forward. So we appreciate your time and we look forward to further discussion on this.
Thank you, Lisa. And the last speaker is Amanda Bancroft.
Yes, hello. Thanks again for the presentation. My name's Amanda Bancroft, and I'm the 350 Silicon Valley San Jose City Team Lead. And so being in that position, we've noticed that 42% of greenhouse gases are associated with transportation, which is a huge amount. So we are definitely in support of the Cut the Commute pledge. And it's more than just, you know, cutting down traffic and lowering the greenhouse gas emissions. We're also, while doing that, we're helping people in low-income communities battle COVID by not having as much air pollution in that area. So I also think we should take a look at it as far as a health concern, along with, you know, cutting down the greenhouse gas emissions. And I mean, living in the Bay Area, you've got to notice how nice it is to have a reduced traffic congestion, and hopefully we don't go back to quote unquote the old normal. So anyway, thanks for hearing me out, and I appreciate the presentation. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go back to the panelists. We still had one question that popped up as I was going to the public. Mary Lynn.
Did we miss someone?
No, sorry. I just found out who was in the Tesla that was in the accident in our city, and they're personal friends. So I cut out for a moment. Excuse me while I gather myself together. First of all, I want to thank Margaret for bringing this to us, and have to say, wow, David Page, what an amazing job you've done. I did get your email. You must have reached out far and wide. Saratoga is in a unique situation. I think our largest employer, as I mentioned earlier in one of the sessions, is West Valley College and the city. So we are in a little bit of a different position than many for being able to ask our companies to respond to this. But in concept, I agree with everything you're doing and I applaud it. So absolutely support it. It's a very timely discussion for Saratoga because we are working on our climate action plan. And this should help inform our discussions. So I want to thank you all and commend you all for the work you've been doing.
Thank you very much. And I know that Rod Sinks had some final comments or a motion. Rod?
Well, I'm not on your board, so I won't be making a motion, but you have appointed me as a representative of the 15 cities of the Bay Area to the Air Board and Air District Board, and I serve as chair this year. So I really thank Margaret for really introducing this comprehensively. Cindy Chavez has been instrumental. I think, you know, the way I look at this is we have a lot of levers in government, but rarely do we have one and an opportunity that actually could have a major impact in the region. And I think the question has been, what's the world we'd like to help create when we return to a new normal, right? From my perspective, this is not the sole solution to the transportation and housing crises that we face here, but it can certainly help relieve some of the pressure. As has been mentioned, GHGs, the transportation sector is now over half of them now that we've cleaned up our electricity supply. Air pollution is a big deal, right? It takes a lot of lives and is debilitating. We have an opportunity here to create, to help nudge Silicon Valley in the right direction. And I would point out that this pledge is very flexible to those who are concerned. Here's what it actually says. Are you ready to step forward and adopt an innovative remote work policy after the shelter in place? By signing this pledge, your company or organization commits to extending remote work options by at least 25% or 1 to 2 days a week for employees whose work requirements allow for that flexibility. And we know there are a lot of folks, our public works teams, they're not going to typically be working offsite, are they? They're going to be trimming trees and maintaining roads and doing all the things they do. And it goes on to say, for those employees that don't have that flexibility, your company or organization will encourage alternatives to driving alone. Obviously, at this time, as has been pointed out, riding cooperatively together is off the table for most folks due to the pandemic. But again, we're as Paul Resnikoff said so well, right? We are at the cusp of trying to help push the thought, really. It's pushing the thought to influence the outcome so we can all enjoy a better quality of life. And given our crises, right, I would say this is a significant lever of potential influence. So I would ask you to entertain this and see if we can work together on, as a region, right, improving our air quality, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and relieving some of the pressure on some of these areas that have been so challenging. So thank you on behalf of the Air District. If you want to look this up yourself, all you have to do is Google Cut the Commute. We had a press conference which included Carl of the leadership group, who was supportive, and others in mid-July. You can also look up the pledge online just by Googling Cut the Commute. So thanks for your consideration this evening.
Okay.
Larry?
Yes.
Unless there's any further comments, I think all the comments that have been raised have been wonderful, and I'm ready to move that we, as Cities Association, approve and sign on as a signatory, and ask staff and ask Andy to bring this to all of cities for their own consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Andy, do you want to go ahead and do the voice vote?
Yeah, who was the second, please? I'm sorry, I heard a bunch of you.
Do Margaret, let Margaret do it.
Okay, great.
Margaret.
Okay. Campbell,
Aye.
Cupertino,
Aye.
Gilroy,
Yes.
Los Altos,
Yes.
Los Altos Hills, absent. Los Gatos,
Yes.
Milpitas,
Aye.
Montessorino, absent. Morgan Hill,
Aye.
Mountain View,
Aye.
Palo Alto,
Aye.
San Jose, absent. Santa Clara,
Yes.
Saratoga,
Yes.
and Sunnyvale.
Yes.
Motion passes. 12 ayes and 3 absent.
Very good. And I thank everyone for that. You know, it's taking advantage of this opportunity that we have right now. And hopefully we'll take this, everyone will take this back to their boards or their councils. Next up is item 4, Racial Injustice Survey, Report and Survey and Discussion of Next Steps. Andy?
Hold on 1 second while I pull it up for you. Hold on, I'm having a moment here. I have too many tabs open.
Huh.
I'm sure you can all relate, right? At the last meeting, you all, as we discussed, as you passed the BLM resolution, you discussed sending out a survey. And I sent out a survey and we, I think it was a bad time, but we did get, well, it says 26 responses. However, there must have been a glitch because we got a whole bunch from Cupertino. So I'm going to share a screen so you can see that. Let's see if I can make that a little bigger for you. Can you all read that?
Yeah.
Okay. So these were the responses. And so it just says 6 from Cupertino responded. We did not get responses from Los Altos Hills or Montessorino. So, and these were what the responses were. And I know that these cut off a little bit, but we talked about a town hall with the police chiefs, public safety directors have their own association similar to this, but we could do some sort of a webinar with them, use an equity lens in all that we do. Housing discrimination, production of BMR, funding for mental health was the highest ranked. Police reform, I believe the government reform was about funding, about how we fund government services. Implicit bias training was also high, and explore working with the, I believe that's the GARE, the Government Alliance for Racial Equity. So here are the other, we also had a number of suggestions. Information sharing is always good. Discussion about what cities use. Citizen boards for police departments to see who uses advisory boards or task force or oversight boards. A few people wrote, discuss GARE, again, the Government Alliance for Racial Equity. Partner with a university or research organization to publish an annual Santa Clara County Disparity Index that explores outcomes by race for income, employment, and organization, company diversity by title. And then also listed ideas are positive for improving racial injustice. Which ones are the most appropriate for the cities association was a comment. So I think that the executive board wanted to ask the board for their thoughts on this. Would you like to have a separate committee to look at this? Would you like the executive board to be that committee? Would you, I think we're just looking for general direction and want to make sure that we take into account what the board would really like to do.
Thank you, Andy. And from my standpoint, this is an ongoing, we have quite a few big issues that are going through our communities right now, and this is one of them. And figuring out what our response is from a per city standpoint, and every city is slightly different, but are there things that we could be doing from a wider standpoint? And I'd just be interested to hear, if there's interest, it's like I'm happy to have the executive board take this on and just kind of continue to do basically an update on what our cities are doing and push this forward just a little bit more. Or we can do a formal subcommittee if people want to join that and create that effort. First up is Liz Niss.
Who has to unmute?
You're unmuted.
You're good.
Okay. So I don't know about other cities, but we have 5 ad hoc committees working on this, including 8 Can't Wait, diversity in a variety of ways. We have been meeting on this kind of all summer. We've all sort of said to each other, did you get a vacation? Because we were off in July. I think we've done a lot of this in our city, and I tend to think maybe having this with the executive committee and then maybe tracking what's going on in other cities so that we know. But I'm not sure we need one more group to take it on, because at least in Palo Alto, we've taken it very seriously, and and there's a little bit of backlash, as you probably all discovered. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Liz. And are the 5 committees subcommittees of council, or is it residents and council?
There's subcommittees of council, and you remember you were a guest at one of them. Thank you for doing it.
Right.
Well,
no, I was just wondering. Okay.
Yes, right. So that was one of the subcommittees, and Larry was the star,
yeah,
telling us about public safety in Sunnyvale, which we are intrigued by. So very helpful. But we've done a number of that, a lot with the police, a lot with the fire, a lot with each one of our departments individually as well.
Thank you. Good.
All on Zoom.
Great. Next up is Steve Preminger.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me speak. I've been working with the city managers and Kent in particular to talk specifically about GARE, Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And we've come to understand that that's a long-term process. It has cities or the county deal with budget issues, hiring issues, procurement issues. And so it's not something that's done quickly. It's something that takes a long-term commitment. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is see if we can get a presentation from the GARE leadership about what does it mean to sign up for GARE. In other words, what does it take for a city or a county to make a real commitment to looking at these issues? And so I'll be reporting back to Kent what we find, and we'd certainly like to invite the Cities Association and Andy to participate, so you can report back and see maybe what systemic change would look like.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other comments, questions? Does any member of the public wish to speak? If so, raise your hand. Seeing none. Is there a motion? Or, sorry, yeah, Rico.
I think based on the comments, what we're hearing, and because Andy does participate with both the county meetings as well as city managers, why don't we as an executive committee take a look at the response, see how we can incorporate it into the priorities that we've already identified. And then what I'd love to do is see how we can incorporate that into priorities for next year, because there was one that received a high amount of looking at cities association work through a racial lens.
Yep.
And I think that could be a way to incorporate all the comments we've heard without necessarily creating another committee.
That sounds good. So do you want to consider that as a formal motion?
That's a motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Kat Tucker. Okay, with that, Andy, may we have a voice vote?
Campbell,
Aye.
Cupertino,
Aye.
Gilroy,
Yes.
Thank you,
Los
dear.
Altos,
Hugs to you. Bye. Yes.
Los Gatos,
Yes.
Milpitas,
Aye.
Montessorino, Morgan Hill,
Aye.
Mountain View,
Aye.
Palo Alto,
Aye.
San Jose, absent, Santa Clara,
Yes.
Saratoga,
Yes.
Sunnyvale.
Yes.
All right, motion passes. 12 ayes and 3 absent.
Okay, thank you. And next up is item 6, or sorry. Next up is item 5, executive board member resignation. And so I'll try to keep this relatively short. As everyone knows, Manny Capella, who was on the executive board as the past president, ended up having to resign his council member position. So that's leaving us one down in the executive board standpoint. And Andy moved on to, Manny moved on to a position that he's been hoping for years. And I think it's really good in West Valley College. And I wish him all the best. But from that standpoint, I'm hoping that the board tonight will allow the president, and as per the bylaws Andy pulled up, if the board approves, the president can therefore appoint a replacement. And so I would be doing that after the approval, but I was just hoping to get that approval tonight. And so Andy, you have the current bylaws up and what the officers are. Are there any comments on this or questions? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Liz. The second?
I'll second. Mariko?
Thank you, Mariko. Andy, may we have a voice vote?
Yep, hold on a second here. Okay, Campbell.
Aye.
Cupertino,
Aye.
Gilroy,
Yes.
Los Altos,
Yes.
Los Gatos,
Yes.
Milpitas,
Aye.
is it Montessorino, absent, Morgan Hill,
Aye.
Mountain View,
Aye.
Palo Alto,
Aye.
San Jose. Oh, absent, sorry. Santa Clara,
Yes.
Saratoga,
Aye.
Sunnyvale.
Yes.
Okay. 12 ayes, 3 absent.
And thank you, everyone. I appreciate allowing me to add back into our executive board. So I'll be announcing that later. Next up is item 6, organizational status, consideration of changing the city's association status. Andy?
Hi, so I just wanted to start that I'm going to hand it off to Shantine that we have been working on this for 3 years now. We thought we had it resolved last year, and then the IRS had sent us that funny letter saying we've resolved the question that you've requested of us. And then months later, the IRS phoned us back and said, psych, we're kidding, we're reopening your file. And after trying to work with the IRS, they have denied our request to change our status. And so we are right now just in, so they've denied it. And so we hired Shantine to work with the accountant that we've been working with. And so I am going to turn it over to Shantine now.
Thank you so much, Andy. And Andy will be our PowerPoint guide because my computer is very much on the fritz, which it's really not surprising if you know anything about attorneys that we have technical difficulties all the time. So, and I'll let Andy chime in as we proceed through this presentation. I want to be mindful of the time and make sure that we're covering everything, but not exceeding time too much. So just wait for that to get pulled up and we'll go ahead and begin.
Sorry, it's playing with me a little. Okay. Are you seeing that or not?
No, but I probably have cursed you. Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
We saw it for a second or saw something.
Yeah, it's in a funny view and I'm trying to get it off that funny view. Okay, you did curse me.
I'm sorry. If you just have the regular scroll view, we can work with that too. It doesn't have to be presentation.
Here we go.
Yep.
There, do you have it now?
That works. Yes.
We do, but
we're on the
we
wrong
need to go back a
screen.
little bit.
Yeah, hold on. Okay, what's going on? Why won't it let me move?
Here we go. There we go. All right, awesome. So beautiful title page, of course, PowerPoint provided a nice template. This really is about the future of the Cities Association and how to move toward a new organizational structure that is legally sustainable. And if you want to click through, I'll just give you cues on moving next. So the purpose here, as I mentioned, is to provide information regarding the change of the Cities Association structure. And we've worked, Andy and I, as well as the accountant, for the past several months about how to proceed. And we've really come down to two potential options that I think would make sense for the Cities Association. The first would be to adopt a joint powers authority schema. And I will discuss that in greater depth herein. But also another option is to proceed and try to set up as a nonprofit organization, specifically a 501c4 social welfare organization. And ideally, we'd like to discuss the next steps for setting up a new organizational structure, which is something that I would be, happy to be involved in conjunction with the accountant. And then lastly, of course, if the board feels it's appropriate, they can vote on those next steps, including potentially an adoption of one of the proposed organizational structures. Okay, next one, perfect. So the history of the Cities Association, just very briefly, when it was formed in 1990, it was not formed as its own independent agency or authority. Over time, of course, there have been different iterations of the Cities Association. Also, California and federal law have changed. And initially, we understand the Cities Association may have been set up with a joint powers agreement, but that's quite a bit different than a joint powers authority, which is its own independent organization. It also was not originally registered as a governmental entity. And as Andy mentioned, that is the hiccup that Cities Association ran into with the IRS. Essentially, the attempt to now register as a governmental entity it seemed initially like it would be successful, and the IRS came back and said, actually, since you failed to essentially check a box many years ago, we can't approve you for that. So that is why we are here and having this discussion. The Cities Association is now and has traditionally operated as a non-governmental unincorporated organization. What that means is that it operates sort of as a body without a legally sustainable structure, which becomes problematic with things like obtaining insurance, obtaining a bank account, monitoring and managing revenue in excess of $5,000 per year, as well as doing other functions. But namely, it's something that the IRS has flagged. And so we want to ensure that the Cities Association is doing everything, dotting its I's, crossing its T's. That's not to say that anything has been improper thus far, and it certainly hasn't. But going forward with how much the Cities Association wants to do and continue to do, we think that this organizational structure change would benefit it significantly. So we go to the next slide. As you all know, Cities Association is growing with respect to its responsibilities, its involvement in a multitude of projects, and in its revenue. You have the Planning Collaborative, you have the Roundtable, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, a number of efforts and resolutions, including some of which we've talked about tonight, diversity, inclusivity, housing, homelessness prevention, transportation, et cetera. And of course, you're also the city selection committee.
And just to be clear that this list is also just kind of things that we've been involved in, and not necessarily that we don't have any more involvement in Silicon Valley Clean Energy, but we did help put that into motion.
Right, exactly. And so to continue to meet these goals, as well as any goals in the foreseeable future, the Cities Association needs to, of course, comply with state and federal regulations that will help it grow. Go ahead, Andy. So the proposal to reorganize is based on those initial premises. And as I mentioned earlier, there are two organizational structures that seem to fit the Cities Association's goals, one of which is a Joint Powers Authority, or JPA, and the other is a 501c4 nonprofit organization. I will mention here that both I, as your counsel on this matter, as well as the accountant, recommend the JPA structure, and I think some of that will become apparent why through this presentation, but ultimately, of course, the decision is with the Cities Association. Joint Powers Authority, what is it? Most of you are probably familiar with these. These are Joint Exercise of Powers Act codified in the California Government Code. And this is a very special and unique type of governmental structure. Most states do not have anything quite like it. They are legal entities that allow two or more public agencies to jointly exercise common powers. And what would probably be best for this particular organization is a completely separate legal entity that operates on its own, that is also therefore protected because the debts, liabilities, and obligations of the JPA belong to the entity and not to the contracting parties, which would be your individual cities. To enter into a JPA, the public agencies, so your cities must enter into an agreement, and that agreement has to be fairly specific. It states the powers of the JPA and the manner in which it will be exercised. And all governing bodies that are contracting must approve the agreement. Fundamentally, who approves the JPA? That is the contracting cities. And ultimately, the JPA is registered with the state of California, and its existence is governed by state law and rules of contract. There is no real IRS oversight. I'll just mention briefly here that the IRS code exempts governmental agencies as tax exempt, and you look to both federal as well as state law to determine what a governmental agency is. California defines a Joint Powers Authority as a governmental agency. So that is why this particular type of organization would be, just like your cities, or other organizations, tax exempt with respect to the funds used for public matters. Go ahead, Andy. So the process to create a JPA is fairly straightforward, I would say. Of course, the first step is to decide whether or not you would like to proceed with one. The second is to draft and approve a constitutional document. That is something that I would work on. I would also theoretically, or could theoretically, work with your cities or your city's attorneys to establish such a constitution. Again, everyone must agree to it, so it is important that it fits the needs of everyone. This is a highly collaborative group. Oftentimes, one of the hurdles for a JPA is having that level of collaboration, but from what I've seen of you all, I don't think it will be a problem. You all are highly collaborative and willing to work together. So that's a fantastic resource that is not always present. And that might take about 1 to 4 months. I will also have an outlay of the timeline as well as expenses at the end, but just so you know, the process is not necessarily a quick turnaround because there can be a number of negotiations. Again, everyone must contract for this particular constitution, so it's important to include everyone's voices. The next step is to draft bylaws, which in this case, I could simply massage your current bylaws, and which would save a lot of time and effort, which is another good thing about the JPA. Andy? You must assign a treasurer and an auditor, probably not a huge ordeal. Again, there's already auditing that occurs. There is an accountant on the rolls. That is something that can continue to be done. And then there are some nitty-gritty filings that have to happen. Of course, registering with the Secretary of State, that's a $1 filing fee, not a big deal. Thanks. And then the JPA would set up an official bond or fidelity coverage for persons entrusted with property of the JPA, and that's simply to protect your assets and liabilities, and as well as secure insurance, which is something that could be done once you've registered with the Secretary of State, which would also accomplish that particular hurdle that the Cities Association has had in obtaining insurance to this point. And lastly, we send the JPA documents to the State Controller's Office and other relevant agencies. Again, really the filings are free, notwithstanding postal fees, although our poor post office is maybe suffering right now, but in terms of fees, it's not excessive. Go ahead, Andy. So in total, the cost of setting up a JPA, approximately $10 in filing fees, very de minimis, approximately 35 hours in attorney's fees, which is about $7,000. And that's an estimate based on a low estimate of how long it might take and a very high estimate. And I came to an average. And there's approximately 0 hours in predicted accountant's fees. And I mean that on top of anything that the accountant's already doing. So there wouldn't be any additional accountant's fees necessarily for setting up the JPA. Of course, the goal would be to utilize Andy and any internal staff whenever possible to minimize expenditures. There's much that Andy can also assist with. And so I'll certainly be using her as a resource going forward. Okay. The next option, as I discussed, is a 501c4. That is a federally recognized not-for-profit incorporation. Specifically, it's a social welfare organization, and it does seem to encompass most of the purposes and agenda of the city's association. It's truly an organization that is primarily intended to further the common good and general welfare of the people of the community. And of course, we've seen even tonight that that is largely the goal of the city's association. So on that basis, it does seem that the 501c4 is a good option. There's also a permissible lobbying exemption here. Some 501c organizations cannot allow lobbying of any kind. 501c4 does allow it to a certain degree. Unfortunately, who decides whether the organization is a 501c4 is not the contracting cities. That would be the federal government, specifically the Internal Revenue Service. And their approval or rejection is largely discretionary. There's a possibility that we could proceed through this process of setting up a 501c4 and dotting every I, crossing every T, but ultimately the examiner may not concur that we are appropriately a 501c4. I'll mention that right now the federal government is understaffed. I used to be a federal government attorney. I'm very familiar with this and with the IRS. And there's also very heightened scrutiny over applications for C organizations at this time, which does raise some concern and has been an issue that the accountant and I have thought greatly upon. Go ahead, Andy. Moreover, the process to create a 501c4, and you can see from the next slides, is significantly more extensive than the JPA process. Of course, the first step would be to determine whether to approach this particular option. Then there would be drafting and approving articles of incorporation, very similar to drafting a constitution of the JPA. The next would be to choose a name. You would likely have to choose a new name and incorporate with the state of California. And that's because there is, we would like to distance and separate the current cities association with any 501c4 that's created in the future. And the reason is to ensure that certain liabilities are not passed on. We think that it would make the most sense for the cities association if they take this approach to dissolve first, and that can actually be done simultaneous with setting up the 501c4. But that would likely be the best option to ensure that any concerns that the IRS has had in reopening the case regarding cities association is not lumped into this new organization, which is fundamentally different in a number of ways, including the relevant goals, levels of revenue, and participation of actors. The next step would be to draft the bylaws, which is again present in the JPA process. Andy? There's a preparation and filing of information with the Secretary of State, and the accountant would assist with a number of IRS-related filings, including getting a tax ID for the organization, preparing a budget for 2 full accounting periods that we have to provide in order to get approval. Andy, go ahead. Thank you. And then, of course, there's the ultimate application for federal tax exemption that would also be handled by the accountant. We would apply for a state and local tax exemption as well, registration with the state attorneys general, and then filing any local licenses or permits, which would have to occur depending on where we establish the particular organization. Andy? Thank you. And then, of course, there would be opening a bank account, obtaining insurance, and optionally applying for nonprofit postal permit. All of those things can be affected sort of simultaneous with registration. And to the extent possible, I've tried to signal in this presentation, which will become available to you all afterwards, the availability or the possibilities of doing things simultaneously. But in some cases, that's simply not possible. Andy, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. So the cost of setting up a 501c4, which is, I know, on everyone's mind, as opposed to the JPA, it's about $1,000 in filing fees, approximately 35 hours in attorney's fees, about $7,000, and that's about the same for both processes because of the some of the fundamental and foundational documents are very similar in terms of what I would need to draft for you all. However, there would be also an approximate 30 hours in accountant's fees at a rate of about $6,000. And of course, here again, we would utilize internal staff, especially Andy, whenever possible to minimize expenditures. Again, even here, I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that Andy could help with or do to help speed this process along and cut costs. Andy? So ultimately, what does the timeline look like for something like this? Well, as you can see, this chart encompasses sort of day one all the way through the first year. In both processes, I don't imagine that anything would be completed before 6 months. Certainly for the 501c4, the average timeline for setting up a C4 is or any C organization really is about a year. I just want to preface though and say that with the understaffing of the government as well as COVID-19, these times are of course based on historical, both anecdotal evidence from me as well as historical evidence that I've looked at. And in this new environment, it's a little bit hard to know if these timelines will be greatly affected by either COVID or the understaffing. The JPA, I predict can be set up closer to 6 months or so. But again, depending on the level of discussion, negotiation, sometimes these things can take a little bit longer. And of course, there's, you know, we want all of your involvement. And so while I predict about 6 months to a year, I do think that by a year, the JPA would be up and running. Andy? And then the last question, which I alluded to a little bit earlier, is what is the initial step? So does the Cities Association, existing as it is, simply restructure, or does it dissolve first to become one of these other entities? For the JPA, the accountant and I both agree that there doesn't seem to be a need for full dissolution. We think that the Cities Association can exist as the entity it is, continue on, and for purposes of continuity of operations, we'll be able to start setting up the JPA and it's sort of in the background, like little mice working in the factory, while you guys are able to do everything that you're doing in the meantime. For a 501c4, that is also possible, but for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, concerns about the IRS opening its case and thinking that the 501c4 is just the Cities Association with a different hat, we would like to propose dissolution before setting up, or really while setting up the 501c4, so that the IRS does not infer those any past liabilities from the Cities Association. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about us existing as an unincorporated organization right now. So while that is not entirely necessary, it is based on accountant and counsel advice, my advice, to dissolve. And again, I would suggest doing that at the end of the process for the 501c4 as to prevent you know, a loss of continuity of operations, but there would be a procedure of some kind to dissolve and then reestablish as opposed to just restructure. So I know I zoomed through that on Zoom and I wanted to do that to spare you all time, but definitely happy to answer questions. And Andy, if you have anything you'd like to input, love to hear from you as well, but from all of you.
I would just like to add that since we are now acting as the Roundtable's fiscal agent, if we became a JPA and they haven't, the executive board has asked the Roundtable to move toward finding another fiscal agent or becoming independent. And so this process that we are going through doesn't affect them and their relationship with us. Also, members of a roundtable ad hoc committee are on the call as well, so they could hear this information. And because the roundtable members are all members of the Cities Association, we are going to hand them this information as well, so that they don't have to hire an attorney and an accountant to go through some of these same questions for them. So, you know, we wanted to utilize, to use our money well for both of us. And so that is the savings to the roundtable.
Right, and just add to that, I mean, the predicted timeline, you know, as I mentioned, for either process will probably vastly exceed the timeline for the roundtable to set itself up as independent. And so it's unlikely to have any conflicting issues there, but the JPA, there's no issue with the fiscal agency. A 501c4, similarly, there's a difference in law and in accounting between a fiscal sponsorship and a fiscal agency. The Cities Association could proceed as a fiscal agency of the roundtable with, again, continuity of operations, even if the roundtable were still even if the Cities Association was still the fiscal agent of the roundtable at the time that it either changed to a 501c4 or a JPA.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, and definitely, you know, we've been talking about this issue since Andy was on Andy basically joined as director, and since I've been on the board for the last few years.
It was the first. Yeah, it was the first thing that happened that we realized. So we've been working on this a long time.
And it's interesting, you know, this organization, this is its 20th year, and this hasn't really, you know, been dealt with in a clear manner. So I'm glad that we're finally, you know, looking at ways to move forward. I have several questions. First up is Mary Lynn.
Of course. Thank you, and thank you for the offer to help us as you move along with any legal fees that may be incurred that would include us. As I said a few minutes ago, I just found out it's a personal friend who died and his wife in the hospital. So I'm not quite as up to performing as I should be. But for that reason, Shantine, I'd like you to repeat the last thing you said about having our being able to be with you for a while longer, depending on our situation as a roundtable, because I have, outside of the ad hoc, building up to the formation of the ad hoc, I have been doing a tremendous amount of outreach with the FAA, with the county, and with other organizations trying to figure out where we can go forward. And I've been hitting roadblocks all the way. So if you would please repeat the statement that you just made about the roundtable's connection with Cassie, please.
Sure, and Mary Lynn, I just want to say I'm so sorry to hear about that news, and I think we all understand the feelings you have or approximating those feelings. So I'm very sensitive to that. Yes, so to answer your question, although I know the roundtable is on the path of establishing independence, and I know you've been putting a lot of work into that to look for a new fiscal agent, the proposition that we've made, either way, the 501c4 or the JPA, both will take quite a bit of time. So we're looking at 6 months to about a year. Much closer to a year, I think, for the 501c4. JPA potentially 6 to 8 months or so on a fast track. The fiscal agent role that the Cities Association plays will not be affected by if it becomes a JPA or a 501c4. And the reason is this: the JPA is allowed to function as a fiscal agent for another organization. It's allowed to proceed and handle, actually act exactly as it's acting. And so I think the big difference might be, or if there is any difference, if we move to a 501c4 and there's a new name of the organization, maybe we need to supplement the memorandum of understanding with the roundtable or the bylaws with the roundtable that simply says that the Cities Association was formally known, or the new association is formally known as the Cities Association, but it's proceeding as the fiscal agent. The 501c4 also can be a fiscal agent of another entity, not a fiscal sponsor. They're a little bit different. Fiscal agent simply means that we're able to have your funds if you don't have a bank account and allow you to use them as appropriate. The fiscal sponsorship is quite a bit different, and that has to do with tax and donor status. So I just want to make that clear that if you kind of Google online, it looks very, they can be conflated often. But in any case, a 501c4 can absolutely be a fiscal agent of another organization, just like the roundtable. So even if the Cities Association were to fast track either process of becoming a JPA or a 501c4 before the roundtable is able to become independent or find another fiscal agent, there should be de minimis effects on the relationship there. Like I said, it may just be a notification or some kind of information that the Cities Association's name has changed. But other than that, it should not affect operationally any distinctions or differences there.
Thank you. I appreciate that and the distinction between the two.
Sure.
There seems to be more reasons for you all to go to a JPA than a 501c3, but I'll leave that to the majority of the group to discuss. Hearing your discussion regarding a JPA, I think the Cities Association is in a good place to be able to do that because you are solid. You are not fluid. The roundtable, as we are seeing with members coming off and coming on, and with a variety of cities and counties, I don't believe is in a position to go to a JPA. So my next question is, I'm going to leave a 501c4 out of it. My next question is, should we have a stumbling block as large as it appears right now? I'm sorry, I'm going with the worst case scenario. Will the Cities Association be willing to ride us out through the contract that we have set up with our consultant, the scope of work that we just passed July 22nd, as we clear that contract? And then it looks to us like we may have to then renegotiate with the amount of money that we have for cutting back potential services from ESA and hiring a program director.
So Mary Lynn,
I know I'm getting a little bit off track, but I'm going, I'm going specifically for, Shantine has been talking about the terms with the amount of time that it may take to put this in effect for you guys. I'm hoping that however time it takes, that basically we will not be invited to go on the street.
Right.
Mary Lynn, can I make a suggestion? So tonight the conversation, and it is agendized that we're talking about the Cities Association tonight. And I understand that the roundtable is very important to you. And we did let Glenn know so that he could listen to this as well. I'm sure that we could find a time that Shantine and I could have a conversation with you about this so that would that be amiable to you?
I think it would, and I think it would have helped if I had a little bit of information ahead so I wouldn't be asking these questions now, but I understand the process of presenting it to everybody. It has some effect on me as a voting member of the board, and that's where I'm trying to make sure that that all the bases are covered. It's not just the roundtable, it's the planning collaborative, and I want to be sure how that process is going to move forward as smoothly as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary Lynn. Next up is Paul Resnikoff.
Thank you, Larry. Two questions. Is there any potential that it's a little more complex or more time consuming for the cities to form a JPA, because there's a difference, I would think, between being a member organization of that group versus paying membership dues to an independent corporation, which is what it would be with a 501c4. So delay the JPA process even more, because every city is going to have to do something to approve that agreement.
That is accurate. And that's the reason why when I was first looking at the JPA option, one of the questions that I talked to, or that I had and that I talked to Andy about a lot was this group and looking at level of collaboration, because as I've worked on these before, sometimes that can be a hurdle. And you're absolutely right that all the contracting parties, so all the cities, do have to agree. And that's part of the reason that I've certainly offered to work with the relevant cities attorneys, if that's something that appeals, as well as with all of you, to ensure that the JPA, at least, as much as possible, even the initial draft of that constitutional document is something solid that can go forward. But you are right that there's a level of collaboration that's required of establishing a JPA that isn't necessarily, I'll say necessarily required of the 501c4. And the reason is because for the C4, still for you all to be members, you will have to agree to the bylaws, which are governed, of course, by the Articles of Incorporation. And so even though those can be prepared in somewhat more of a vacuum, there still is a potential for each of the contracting or member cities to go back to their relevant councils or whomever is going to approve this and have a discussion and make sure that this is something that when it's presented makes sense for your city. So in the abstract, yes, it's possible that a JPA could require more collaboration or more time. On the other hand, I've seen a 501c4 take a significant amount of time as well because of the buy-in required for the bylaws as well as the Articles of Incorporation that will also have to be created and then approved by the body.
Okay, is there any difference to the members in liability when the C4 is a corporation and we're essentially paying dues versus being a member agency of the JPA?
So the oh, Andy, do you have something to say? Sorry.
I was just gonna say a big yes on the 501c4 liability.
Well, liability to whom? I'm thinking from the city standpoint. The city pays dues to a corporation to be a member of that C4.
Right. So the problem is that for the past 30 years, we've been acting as a type of organization, and the IRS is saying that we were a corporation and so the liability, they could deem that we have liability for 30 years.
Is a liability with the corporation or is it divvied up to the individual member?
Right.
There you go. Your turn.
It's for the corporation as well. So the JPA both are not pass through. They're yeah. So the liability remains with those.
Okay. I didn't realize the JPA wasn't a pass through. The last question. Yes. I've sat on a number of JPAs and they're always 4 or 5 members. Is it typical to have 15 in this case, or maybe even more? I mean, is that not that doesn't present an issue other than the contractual issue of developing it?
Right. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's an organization, the California League of Cities. There's a number of very, very large JPAs, and they're actually increasing in popularity. I had a little slide on this, but I kind of tossed it out just for time. But they're growing as a mechanism for government, as well as the membership can go anywhere, like you said, from 4 or 5 to intergovernmental. So you can be inter-county. It can actually have a JPA with federal government involved. There's a lot. It's a very flexible type of body, and partially because of how it's defined in California law is so flexible. So like you said, really the question is collaboration, but if everybody can sign on, then it can be as big and large as is manageable, or as small as is practicable.
Thank you. So I see the problem either way is getting this as a priority in front of our attorneys, to be honest, because of
sure
else going on. If that's going
sure
to be be hard for everybody, I think. But thank you.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And to that point, Paul, I just want to say that the first, at least like I said, the first stab or iteration of either document, whether it's the constitution of a JPA or an incorporation document, would be something that I would work on and hope to give something that is based on models that I've used and seen. And so ideally, even though I understand it might not be the #1 priority, I would hope that it would not require too much of their individual time, would be obviously my hope for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next up is Jan Pepper.
Thank you for the presentation on this. I think that the JPA makes a lot of sense. It's the common way that we do joint action as cities. Hold on just a second.
The wonderful world of Zoom.
I know.
Sorry. I actually run a JPA that consists of 22 members. So they can be any size. The Cities Association equivalent in San Mateo County is a JPA. Silicon Valley Clean Energy is a JPA. We use those for lots of things. So I think that would be the appropriate type of organization for this to be, because it's a joint action agency. That's what we're all about here for the association. So I would actually like to make a motion that we move forward to become a JPA and all of the associated things that need to be done with that.
Thank you, Jan. If we can hold that motion for a moment, I'd like to see if there's any members of the public who wish to speak on this item. And raise your virtual hand. Seeing none. Is there a second to Jan's motion?
A second. This was Carmen Montano.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Andy, go ahead and do a voice call.
Okay. Campbell.
I'm sorry, and this is to choose select JPA?
Yes.
Correct.
Campbell.
Aye.
Cupertino.
Aye.
Gilroy.
You know, I'm just confused. You know, you guys have been talking about this for a long time. So, I mean, I'm going to go along with you, but personally, this is way too much to digest in a half an hour of a presentation for me. But I trust all of you guys know what you're talking about, and I'll vote yes.
Thank you, Kat.
Los Altos.
Yes.
Los Altos Hills. Los Gatos.
Yes.
Milpitas.
Aye.
Montessorino. Morgan Hill.
Aye.
Mountain View.
Aye.
Palo Alto.
Aye.
San Jose, absent. Santa Clara.
Yes.
Saratoga.
Aye.
And Sunnyvale.
Yes.
The motion passes. 12 ayes, 3 absent.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say thank you?
Thank you all. Yes.
Thank you. Been working
you
on
on
this a
behalf of
long
Andy.
time.
And just to put this into perspective, this decision has been a long time coming, and what our organizational status has been discussed off and on for several years, and whether or not, and as we get to this point, this is an important decision. And I think definitely the JPA does have a lot of value for the organization. And as Jan said, this is kind of a common structure that other counties are doing for their organizations. Next up is COVID-19 updates as time allows. Since we're at negative time at this point, we will skip this item. After that is the city manager's report. Kent?
Thank you. Just a brief report. The city managers have been meeting in a weekly format with short weekly meetings to connect with each other on current topics. This week, we talked about the status of police reforms in each of our cities. Last week, we talked about outdoor businesses and how we're all dealing with sort of the growth of outdoor businesses in our communities and how we're doing permitting and regulating those. So we've been very active in getting together regularly and with interesting topics every week.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Andy, Director's report.
I'll go really quickly. Wanted you to know that the Planning Collaborative I think we've turned a corner. The Planning Collaborative is made up of our community development directors and planning and housing folks. And they have agreed that they would like the Planning Collaborative to continue. And we had been thinking that we would apply for a REAP grant through ABAG, which is HCD money that was made available in the governor's budget last year. However, the REAP money is not available yet. And so we don't know when it's going to be available, but our money has run out with the Planning Collaborative. And so what we are investigating is whether the LEAP loans, the local, somebody help me out, I just lost the acronym, the LEAP grants that each of your cities are individually applying for that are similar to the SB2 grants. Some of the cities have already been approved by for those grants, and some of them are still working on their application process. But what we are investigating is if each city can take just a small amount of money to put toward the planning collaborative. And at first we were looking at an even $10,000 for each of the cities, but now it's going to be a tiered with Montessorino and Los Altos Hills paying less and San Jose paying the most, but San Jose would pay $16,000 or $18,000. And it would fund, and it would be all 16 jurisdictions. So I don't know if anybody, but it seems to be working well. And then regarding the roundtable, I'm not sure if we mentioned it at the last meeting in June, but the executive board has requested that the roundtable either find a new fiscal agent or become independent. Roundtable members have voiced concerns that they would like to do their own hiring and they would like to be in charge of the scope of work, but the cities association, we are the fiscal agent and the signer. And so, and per the bylaws and the MOU, we are in charge of the contract. So we're working through that. And also there was a packet of letters, and the letters have been uploaded to the agenda webpage. There were letters regarding the cut the commute. There is also a letter there that was sent to the roundtable on behalf of the executive board sent to the roundtable. And then let me see, I've got just one, we've started our audit. City of San Jose does our audit, and we've started the audit. And is my time up? Somebody rang a bell. Also in the packet of correspondence on the board agenda website, there is a letter that we sent to ABAG. There is a letter we sent to the governor and to HCD. Audit. And I'm about to post a position for an admin assistant to help with our work with the Cities Association. And that will be 40 hours a month. So that is it. Phew.
Okay, thank you everyone for staying late tonight. And Mary Lynn, you know, my condolences for your friend. I know how difficult that might be. So we will be adjourning this meeting until September 10th. Thank you everyone for staying late. Stay safe, take care, bye.
And the 10th starts at 5.
What was that?
On the 10th, it would start at 5 and then we would have a break at 6.
Oh, for how long?
For an hour. Or we can just start the meeting. Well, we'll talk about that if we want to start earlier. Do we lose?
Okay. All right.
Thank
Someone-
you.
Okay.
We'll do a poll offline. Thank you,
Larry,
everyone.
compared to our council meetings, this was short.
What was that, Stephen? Oh.
Compared to our city council meetings, this was very short meeting.
I'm happy it wasn't too long. Anyway, thank you, everyone.
No 3 a.m. meetings, please. Thank you.
No, never. Good night.
Good night.